Corruption Watch has released a podcast series looking at land and corruption. The series follows years of work in which the organization has been looking at corruption issues in the land sector, and these involved discrimination against the most marginalized in the sector, particularly farm workers. And this week, the organization will also be publishing a report complementing the podcast, which outlines corruption in farm worker equity schemes. And for more, we're joined by senior researcher at Corruption Watch, Melusi Ncala. Melusi, good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us. Just in terms of how long the podcast has been running and what it was intended to do as a public platform.
Good afternoon, Cindy, as well as to the viewers. So for quite some time, since the inception of the organization in 2012, when we received reports of corruption, much of these reports, or at least almost 1,000 of them, were about land issues. But that would be issues relating to mining, housing, and just general treatment of labor tenants in particularly rural areas. And in the recent years, we started conducting research looking at land policies. In particular, now we're talking about equity schemes, which is a land policy that the government has been rolling out since the 1990s. And what we discovered in this particular, what's been happening in this policy is that commercial farmers are being paired up with farm workers, in which they were supposed to form a partnership, but it has not been working out as intended, and the government is well aware of this. And so we've taken this information and we've compiled it, written a report about it, which we will publish this week. And we've also then put it together in a podcast series, which so far has outlined how the land system works in practice in South Africa, but also how land corruption and human rights abuses intersect, because ultimately these labor tenants are affected by what's happening in these land policies.
Okay, looking at policy, and we know as the build-up to the general elections in 2024, we're likely to hear the expropriation of land without compensation, but that was not the focus of your report. You're talking about equity schemes that commercial farmers had agreed with, signed on the dotted line in the promise to give farm workers some piece of land for their labor over the years. How endemic is the problem of corruption in the sector?
The government knows quite well that there have been issues of financial irregularities, mismanagement. In some instances, some of these farm workers, these labor tenants, are not even paid their dividends or wages as per the agreements that they have with these commercial farmers. These commercial farmers, in essence, are supposed to upscale farm workers. But in the years that this particular program has been rolling out, there's been little to no development in the lives of these farm workers. We're talking about people still being evicted after serving farms 30, 40 years. And you wouldn't believe, given the circumstances that they live in, that, they are actually shareholders in these businesses.
Yeah, and Melissa, what do you think then, maybe as some form of not punishment or just punitive measures that can be taken? Are you looking to name and shame these commercial farmers so that it's out in the public that they are in essence delinquent Yes. to a policy and promises that they've made?
Not only should we be naming and shaming the commercial farmers, which is something that we're doing in the podcast series, because when you look at the Wittenberg area, for example, it's essentially run by a cartel. It's 3-4 white families that are running the farming industry, and which is ultimately responsible for billions upon billions of rands in terms of the South African economy. But also they have been assisted by officials in the Land Reform and Rural Development Department. There have been officials there who are well aware of what's been happening in the sector, but instead of assisting complainants and the beneficiaries, they have been the architectures of these flimsy, flawed deals that beneficiaries have been finding themselves in since the inception of the policy.
Melusi, time permitting, we'll certainly want to engage with you further at another occasion, but we're going to have to leave it there for the moment. Really appreciate your time this afternoon here on All Angles. That's Melusi Ncala. He's the Senior Researcher of Corruption Watch. They've released a report that shows corruption in the land sector, primarily when it comes to commercial farmers, and promises that they've made in equity schemes for farm workers.